It's Monday, and that means it's time for a new episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. And here's your host, Andrea Lee, and sometimes Alex. Good morning and welcome to a new week and a brand new episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. I hope you've got your turkey thawing, your pumpkin pie, and your potatoes mashed and all that good stuff started, because it's only 3 days until we gobble till we wobble. I think I'm actually going to get started cooking on Wednesday evening so I don't bake till I ache. Plus, we're eating at lunchtime this year because Alex has to work for a little while that evening. Anyway, enough talk about Thanksgiving because I'm literally starting to get hungry. Now, what do you think about when I say church? Most of us think about stuff like the choir singing, the preacher preaching, maybe dinner on the grounds after service. What would you say if I told you that the Holy Trinity isn't the only Holy Ghost hanging out at some churches? That's right, many churches are haunted. And it makes sense because, there's funerals in churches, but that's not the only way a church would become haunted. In Niles, Michigan, there's a 156-year-old church on the corner of Pucker Street and Chapel Road. It's called Morris Chapel, and it has a spirit of a jilted bride inhabiting its holy sanctuary. The legend goes that a young woman named Catherine was about to marry the love of her life. At the last minute, the groom backed out. Well, naturally, Catherine was heartbroken, and guess what she did? She hung herself right over the very spot that she was supposed to exchange vows with her beloved. Now, there are several variations of this story, and one says that Catherine killed the intended groom before killing herself, and in another version, it was the groom who hanged himself and not Catherine. Now, whichever version you choose to go with, if you go with any of them, it is said that on dark nights, you can hear the ghost of Catherine crying in the chapel. Sometimes the lights go off and on their own. Now, there's some people that have even claimed to see someone hanging from a tree that's behind the church and near the church's graveyard. But is there any truth to this, though? It seems kind of unlikely, and I'm not one to, be all about debunking, ghost stories or anything. But there's one thing about it is that there's no historical information that says that there was, a suicide that ever took place in the church. And as I mentioned, there's a graveyard on the property. There's several Catherines buried there, but none of them spelled their name like our Catherine did. Our Catherine spelled her name Kathryn, and the Catherines that are buried in the graveyard spell theirs Catherine. And none of those Catherines would have been the correct age range for the Catherine in the story. Their ages range from 46 to 90 years old. Another fact that makes this story very doubtable is that some folks say that it happened at a completely different Morris Chapel. They say it happened at what used to be known as Morris Chapel, but is now known as Morris Estates. It's a very cool story, even if it isn't true, though, y'all. One interesting but sad story related to this graveyard that I found while I was kind of digging into the history of the church and the stories and whatnot. But it's about a 3-year-old girl named Nelly Brown. Now, Nelly was born with spinal issues, and because of it, she couldn't walk very well. Her parents were Frederick Albert Brown and Mary Etta McQuaid. Now, they decided that she was just too much of a burden to take care of. So they literally decided to get rid of her. First, Mary, the mom, she struck her on the back, causing Mary to kind of fall forward, and she hit her head, but that injury wasn't fatal. So they starved the little girl to death. Right after Nelly passed away, authorities believed that she had been strangled, but soon they figured out what her parents had did. The Browns had also had another child who had passed away, but the circumstances of that child's death hasn't been revealed like that I could find. They also had 2 living children, and those kids were quickly removed from the home. Now, I guess justice wasn't swift enough or wasn't going to happen because a group of vigilantes, they got together to avenge Nelly's death. One night in June of 1896, a group of 16 men paid the Browns a visit. They ransacked the house and forced the couple out of the area, and to keep them away, they threatened to tar and feather them or even possibly kill the Browns if they ever showed up in that area again. They never returned to that area, and it seems like they never faced charges for the death of little Nelly, because I never could find anything online that said that, they had faced charges or, was prosecuted or anything. In Spring Hills, Pennsylvania, there is a church known as Egg Hill Church. Church services haven't been held there regularly since 1927. The property that the church sits on is lined with a rusted iron fence, and legend has it that the spirits of many who used to worship there are entrapped within the church and its grounds. In the early 1900s, the church was the site of a mass murder carried out by its deranged preacher. The preacher chained the doors shut and then murdered everyone in attendance and disposed of their bodies in the nearby forest before he hung himself in the bell tower. Each member of the congregation that day were stabbed or slashed to death. The knife that the pastor used is actually encased in a tombstone in the church graveyard, and locals say that if you remove it, a pool of blood takes its place. Now, like the previous story, there's no proof to back up this ever happened, but people have reported hearing the screams and cries of the victims of the massacre. Others have heard the phantom sound of the bell ringing in its tower. And some have even said that spirits have followed their vehicles from the property as they drove away. But one thing that should be noted about this legend is that in the church's graveyard, there is no large number of graves with the same death date. So, going by that, unless people were buried in random other places, it just doesn't seem like that actually ever really happened. Who knows? Adams Grove Presbyterian Church was built in 1853, and the last church service was held there in 1974. The church and its graveyard are one of Alabama's most haunted locations. Ever since that last church service, people have been reporting strange events there. Several people have reported seeing a shadow figure with fiery red eyes lurking about the church and the graveyard. Others have seen the ghost of a Confederate soldier keeping guard of the property and running off any trespassers. And just before it storms, the spirit of a former preacher can be seen inside the church building. And other folks have said that they hear the cries of a baby throughout the church. Now, for some reason that I just can't explain, and I feel drawn to that building. Like, I've only seen a picture of it, or lots of pictures of it, but it feels like it's calling to me, and it feels like this mournful cry, like a cry for help maybe, but it kind of makes me think of the feeling I get when I look at a certain window at the state hospital in Columbia on the Babcock building. I just get this feeling that somebody needs help. I've never had it happen from a picture before, so that's just kind of new for me. Now, our last haunted church that we're going to talk about today is St. Mark's in the Bowery, and it's located in New York City. Now, not only is it the most haunted church in New York City, but it's also the second oldest in the city. One such spirit there is known as Peg Leg Pete, and he's been disrupting services at the church for centuries. He also happens to be the founder of St. Mark's. His name is Peter, and I'm going to try his last name, but his name is Peter Stuyvesant, okay? He lost one of his legs while fighting the Spanish. Now, this was before he came to America. Now, like I said, he was the founder of that church, and he had immigrated from the Netherlands in 1647. But anyway, when he was in that war with the Spanish, he was wounded so severely by a cannonball that they had to amputate his leg. Well, many have seen him stomping around the church, and the distinctive tap of his peg leg can be heard. He's also been heard singing along with the hymns during services in his native tongue. In 1930, congregation members saw him sitting among them. And when this has been many years ago, but the church tower bells just started ringing on their own in the middle of the night. That was in 1865. Now, people of the area gathered at the church to see what all the commotion was. And when they got there, they were met by this terrified custodian who claimed to have been chased through the church throughout the night. Well, they went to check on the bell tower to see who was making all the noise with the bell. And when they got to the door, it was locked. But they finally got inside the tower, and they found that the bell's rope had been cut off. Now, who could have cut down a rope up so high? I mean, it's a bell tower that no one could have possibly reached the ropes without a lot of effort. Now, they searched the church to see who could possibly be ringing those bells at such an inconvenient hour. When they came to Pegleg Pete's crypt, which is right there on the church grounds, what do you think they found? The length of rope that was cut from the bell. And he's not always alone. Sometimes he's joined by a female spirit who seems to enjoy welcoming worshipers at the rear entrance of the church. And some people have said they see her in the balcony of the church, and she's always wearing like this wide skirt. And by that, I believe they probably mean like the big skirts that ladies wore back in the olden days, like with the hoop skirts underneath. But the thing is I can't find out who this lady is. There's nothing about her identity. But it's really interesting. Kind of wouldn't mind visiting some of these places just to see if I get that feeling. Well, I'm pretty sure there's plenty of ghost stories out there that come from churches. And we'll probably do another episode of them in the near future. But that's all we have for today. Thanks for listening, and be sure to come back on Wednesday for an all-new midweek mini. Have a great week.